Hello, and thank you for tuning into the Stuff I Heard podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Peak. And how are you guys doing? Good to see y'all. Obviously, I can't see you, but you can see me if you're checking this out on YouTube, on the YouTubes. So anyway, I have had an interesting week. I have been on the go, out there seeing the world. I had a work event to go to and a little bit of car driving. So I had some time to listen to lots of podcasts. And let's just get right into it. Okay. This is the Stuff I Heard podcast. So I have been consuming content and I want to share that content with you because I don't know. I feel like if I'm sharing it with you, then you guys are learning a little bit. You're like, hey, I like that also. Maybe I should check it out. Maybe it might be cool. In the words of Matthew McConaughey, be a lot cooler if you did. And it would. It would be a lot cooler if you did. So anyway, this past year, comedian Neal Brennan, co-creator of the Chappelle Show and multiple other genius comedic things, has his second next Netflix special hit. It was called Blocks. If you guys haven't seen it yet, Blocks is very good. On there, he talks about how we all have things in our minds that become blocks, and what I mean by that is a little rundown here, blurb, if you will, on Google says, based on the Netflix comedy special Blocks, Neal Brennan interviews friends and colleagues about the things that make them feel lonely, isolated, and like something's wrong, um, and how they are alike. So, anyway, uh, this is based on his Netflix special, which is genius. It's a genius podcast. Um, and I noticed he built a podcast based on the comedy special, and I was like, okay, I got to check this out. First episode. Okay, now think about think about the world of podcasting. Think about how you found me. Okay, how did you find me? I have no idea. Did a friend hand to you? Did you accidentally find it? Were you looking up keywords and all of a sudden you seen my goofy face? I don't know. But Neil Brennan, his first person that he has on his podcast is David Letterman. Okay. For people who don't know, David Letterman used to be used to be the late night show. Okay. Everybody of my generation watched David Letterman religiously whenever he was on. He was the late night show that we would all go to sleep watching or right after watching. Um, his top 10 review was always hilarious. It was always the thing that we would watch and we would go, great, now I can go to bed. This is great. This is exactly what I wanted. This was a great podcast. So Dave has his own thing on Netflix called And My Next Guest Is. And he mentions on this podcast how he sits down and he gets, several weeks of being able to do research on the people and sitting down with them and talking to them and having a conversation that he's wanted to have back when he had a late night show. But on a late night show, you've got 2 or 3 minutes and you got to be funny, you got to be interesting, and you got to move the thing along because it's time to sell more commercial airspace, right? And that's great and all, but it's not how we're wired. Like we want to have more information. And Neil Brennan, I guess, through the success of various things that he's done, his first Netflix special was Three Mics. If you haven't seen that, that is brilliant. It is basically taking ideas from 3 points of view and physically using three different microphones on stage to get those points across. Explaining how each point of view is valid, but sometimes conflicting, and how we all debate these things within our heads. And it's the visual aid of the three mics that gives us that. Same thing with blocks. In Blocks on Netflix special, he uses physical blocks on a wall that are beautiful and designed by a friend of his who's an artist. And he says it cost him a lot of money, even though they're friends. But it's the visual aid that sometimes we need in order to get our point across, right? That's why I do this on YouTube. That's why a lot of people do this stuff on YouTube because they want you to have the visual aid of being able to see the thing. So his conversation with Letterman is great because he gets to discuss with Letterman what an impact he was, but also gets Letterman to talk about his own blocks, his own insecurities and his things that he sees that are a failing in his eye. Like we all self-criticizing of ourselves. Our worst enemy is ourselves oftentimes. Sometimes the hardest thing that you can do is be honest with yourself. I mean, you can have a narrative that you think is what is your real life and what you believe in and what you think. And then at times you find yourself breaking your own creed because you're like, well, I know I said I'm a patient person, but here I am losing control. Or I know that I said that I don't drink, but here I am having a drink. Or I said that I don't eat meat, but here I am eating meat. Whatever the thing is, you know, oh, I said that I am a pro, whatever this team, and now I'm rooting against them in some way. And it's okay to be contrarian. It's okay to break the rules once in a while. One of the things that I look for the most is people who openly admit that they don't know something and they say, "Hey, I used to think this, but I got more information and I've changed my mind or I'm looking at it differently." Like just be willing to look at life and have an approach of learning, I guess is the key. Admit that you're learning. And so this is part of that. That to me, Neil Brennan is a genius at that because he's like, listen, I have a lot of things wrong with me. Here are my blocks, and I'm going to call it blocks. And I'm going to have people on all the time, and they're going to talk to me about their blocks. And he does a great job with this with David Letterman right off the bat with the first episode. Um, he had just done Bert Kreischer's podcast, the Bertcast. Great episode, also. Um, or maybe it was Two Bears, One Cave. I don't know. It was one of the two, but he was with Bert. And somewhere in this, David Letterman brings up Bert Kreischer out of the blue. And he was like, "Oh, please, we gotta have a moment where we can call him. Let's call him." And so they call him on the podcast and get his voicemail, and Dave leaves him a voicemail. And for a lot of comedians, it was a huge deal to get on David Letterman. Now, because I'm a Bert Kreischer fan, because I've been listening to these comedy podcasts for so long, I know a little bit of the history of this. Bert had been on David Letterman while he was on Travel Channel as the host of Trip Flip, one of various shows that he had on Travel Channel, including Bert the Conqueror, and um, there was some other travel type show that he did. Anyway, doesn't matter. Maybe it was two iterations of Bert the Conqueror and Trip Flip mixed in there. But point being, Bert was doing comedy sort of on the side with his television gig. And then he had done David Letterman. He was booked to do a huge comedy tour called the Oddball Comedy Festival. And for whatever reason, the Oddball tour had to cancel like just a few venues into the thing. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes. But Bert was like, "Hey, wait a second. Like, I got kicked off this tour. Oh, wait, the whole tour closed? What happened?" And then the gig with Travel Channel went away. And he was like, "What? Wait, I was just on David Letterman. Like things were starting to happen." But now this is the pivotal moment where he thought things were going to be on the up and up from that point on. Like things were looking up. Things are starting to, I'm starting to get some fire and people are paying attention. I'm killing it. I'm on television. I'm doing comedy. I'm invited to do comedy shows and go on tours with people. And I just did David Letterman, which is the summit for me. And then it all goes away. And I remember listening to Bert's podcast during this time where he was panicking. He was like, "Wait, what am I doing? What how what am I going to do?" And he had to redefine himself. Now listen, a lot of people have heard me talk about Bert and what an inspiration he is, but this is the key to it. Okay. Because when things look the darkest, he decided, you know what? I believe in myself enough to think that I can figure this out. I just have to work harder than I have been. I have to focus myself on my comedy because my comedy is my saving grace. My comedy is the thing that I know that I'm good at. Television shows come and go. I can control what I can control. So at the time, he had a podcast. It was a small podcast at the time. I want to say that, less than a million people listened to it at the time. Um, that's a fair estimate. I would say that episodes were getting maybe 100,000 downloads, and I was one of the early adopters. I was one of the early listeners, and from the beginning, um, I kept hearing his evolution change. Um, and during this time, he redefined himself. He refocused. He was like, let's double down on the podcast. Let me spend money on myself. Let me get better equipment. Let me look at hiring somebody to be a sound engineer. Let me, try to hit up people to help me book things. I need to spend more time behind the microphone and less time doing the nuts and bolts stuff because up to that point he'd been doing everything himself and it was driving him a little bit crazy, kind of like it does me from time to time. Although I'm not a stand up comedian. Um, but from that drive, he now has one of the largest platforms there is anywhere. Um, he has several podcasts that he does. Two Bears, One Cave is probably, I would say, larger than his normal podcast. His normal podcast is doing fantastic, but Two Bears, One Cave has hit astronomical levels of fame for him and Tom Segura, who is his best friend. So there's a lot in there to unpack. Okay. And you think, okay, well, this guy's got it all together. He's episode 2 of Neil Brennan's blocks. Episode 2, Bert Kreischer. Um, Neil Brennan interviews Bert Kreischer about the things that make him feel lonely, isolated, and so like something is wrong, and how he is persevering despite these blocks, persevering despite these blocks. I'm trying to read it off my thing here. I got one good eyeball. So yeah, second episode, Bert Kreischer. Boom, good podcast, good conversation. He even plays them back the stuff with David Letterman, which is pretty fantastic. Third episode is with Nikki Glazer. These episodes are about 40 minutes long. They're not very long, pretty quick. Nikki Glazer actually opened for Bert Kreischer for a number of years and has now entered a different stratosphere of fame because she's done Dancing with the Stars and she hosts all sorts of television shows and has her own podcast thing going on where she works for Sirius XM on a show called You Up and does podcasting with other people and is just one of those people that is naturally good at talking in front of people. She says that she has her own hangups. And listen, this is a really great podcast. She talks about a lot of her own fears and insecurities and how she projects an image of someone who is not really like who she is in a lot of ways, just to find her own inner strength, which I think a lot of people can relate to. That's the thing is usually the people who are the loudest are the people who are afraid the most. Um, I just went to this conference, this class, and I noticed day one, everybody's introducing themselves. Day two, one person was the most vocal out of the group. And it dawned on me that he's talking the most because he feels the most insecure out of the group. And I don't think he realized that. I think some of the older people realized it, but oftentimes whenever someone talks incessantly, it's because I don't know, they feel like they have to justify why they're there to other people. They have to promote themselves in a way that gets you to notice them. It's for attention in sort of a way, but it's more of a security blanket thing of, see, guys, I'm here. I belong. I'm one of you. I deserve some respect. I'm not just a whatever. And maybe that's just his personality. I don't know. But that was one of the thoughts I had. And it made me think about the podcast that I listened to, and this podcast in particular with Nikki Glazer. Um, she's like, I fill the silence with something because I can't stand the silence. It makes me crazy. Anyway, check it out. It's pretty good. Very next episode, Sebastian Maniscalco. You guys, if you don't know who he is, quick Google image, and you'll be like, "Oh, I've seen him in movies. He does movies. He does television. He's one of Jerry Seinfeld's best buddies. He's a friend to a lot of comedians. Um, very Italian, very boisterous. His latest Netflix special, he dressed up in a tuxedo. He asked everybody to dress up. He did a long thing where he talked about thank you for dressing up and making it look nice and making an effort. And he goes, we live in a time where people don't make enough of an effort, and that was his big thing. But this is pretty good. Um, and then I heard, where is it? I got too many photos. Where is it? Okay, so then episode 5 is with Andrew Santino. Andrew Santino is starting to do movies and television and stuff like that. Also has a really huge podcast with um I keep wanting to say Tiger Belly. What is it? Oh, what's his name? Bobby Lee, comedian Bobby Lee. Yeah. Their podcast together, I'm told is super popular. I haven't heard it. I've seen clips of them on YouTube. You've probably seen clips of them on YouTube of them basically harassing each other and giving each other a hard time. They're really good friends, and they say the Bobby says the wildest and craziest stuff, and I guess Andrew is a really good improv person, so he bounces ideas back a lot. Um, I never watched Curb Your Enthusiasm, but I heard on this podcast that he was on that. And from what I understand, Curb Your Enthusiasm was a show that was had a loose based outline, and then the rest of the show was them improving. So it was a crazy idea, but they made a television show out of people doing improv just on the fly. Hey, let's make a comedy show. In this scene, this guy's going to do this and go. And they would just go with it from that point, which is nuts to think about. But yeah, that was the premise of the show. Um, he's really good in this. He talks about, you know, his own insecurities, his own issues, a lot of stuff about friendship and how he views friendship. Anyway, it's interesting. If you want to check that out, please do so. And I'm going to be listening to more and more of Neil Brennan's blocks. I think he's a genius. I think that he's relatable to a lot of people. I think that he is self-aware enough that even if you don't know who he is, you're going to hear him speak, and he's very thoughtful and and honest. So yeah. All right. So then I listened to Bert Kreischer on the Bertcast episode 555 with Steve Byrne. Steve Byrne used to have a show on television called Sullivan and Sons. I watched that when it was on. It was pretty good. Um, in this is a 2 hour and 39-minute podcast where they drink a lot. They drink a lot. They've been friends for for a very long time, over 20 years old. Their friendship has been. They actually went on tour together, the Jameson tour years ago, back with a bunch of other comedians in Scotland and Ireland and stuff like that. But yeah, there's the announcement of the Machine movie coming out May 25th of 2023. If you guys don't know, go on YouTube and look up the Machine movie. And yeah, that's coming out Memorial Day weekend, May 25th. So this is a great podcast between two friends, and they at times have Bobby Kelly on the phone. They sort of harass each other a little bit. Leanne stops in the studio to talk to them because she's known them um, for 20 plus years, and I would say that Steve Byrne is probably one of Bert's oldest comedian friends. Not like age oldest, but started being friends with him early on when he started doing comedy. And so this is a really good podcast of them just hanging out and having a bunch of drinks and being silly and talking a little bit of trash and being a little bit reckless, and but it's good. It's really good. So that's just stuff I've listened to in the car while I've been driving because I did a lot of driving. Now let's talk about stuff I heard as far as watching. Okay. There is. Oh, and Steve Burns got a new comedy special. I was supposed to say that. Yeah. It's on Amazon Prime right now. It's called The Last Late Night, available on Amazon Prime Video. Basically, it's him doing almost like a late night talk show thing as a comedy special. And I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to check it out, though, probably this week. Okay. So, new on television, HBO has a show called The Last of Us. This is based on a video game, from what I understand. I did not have a PlayStation during this time. This was only on PlayStation when it first came out. The premise for the show: Joe and Ellie, a pair connected through the harshness of the world they live in, are forced to endure brutal circumstances and ruthless killers on a trek across post outbreak America. So, this is based on a video game. It has to do. Listen, okay, so there's an intro. If you haven't seen this, I'm gonna try not to spoil anything right now. Okay, but I'm telling you, I'm gonna talk about this in future episodes. So you better keep up. You better watch them because I'm just gonna start off with talking about this show week to week as it comes out. It's that good. Okay. Pedro Pascal is the main character, Joel. He has a daughter, and in the beginning of the show, it's like 1969, and there's some panel discussion with scientists and some guy who's supposed to be making comedy in between talking to serious people about serious things. And he's talking to them about diseases, and do you think that diseases are going to be a problem in the future? And this one guy talks about how, well, yes, but we're always going to have coronaviruses. Corona meaning new. We're going to have new viruses that we haven't seen before, and we're always going to find ways to fight them. Blah 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 blah. And he looks to the other guy and he says, "What do you think?" And he says, "Well, viruses aren't my concern." He says, "Viruses we can figure out. And what I'm concerned about is bacteria." And he's like, "What?" And he's like, "Well, bacteria is something different. If it's fungal, then currently we have ways to control it, but if the temperature of the earth changes, then that greatly affects how this organism reacts." And I'm paraphrasing here. You got to watch the first 2 minutes of the show, 3 minutes, whatever it is, and hear him explain this. And it sort of sets up the prologue of what the show is going to be. It's like, hey, here's the thing. It's not going to be viral. It's going to be bacterial, and it's going to infect people in a way that basically it's like okay, it's another zombie show. So anyway, these living dead zombie things are going to come after you, and they're going to want to eat your flesh, and that's how they survive. And from what I can tell, watching the intro, okay, spoilers. This is the part where if you don't want to hear it, don't. I'm just going to tell you a quick spoiler. The spoiler is the little girl in this is infected, but she hasn't turned. You can see on her skin how this stuff is in her somehow, but she's not turned. And up to this point, everyone who's infected turns like almost immediately. And so they think that there's something about her DNA or her blood or something like that. Uh, she is going to be the answer to the cure. That's the theory. Okay. And we're living in this post apocalyptic world at a certain point of the show because it does fast forward 20 years where things are a little reckless and dangerous in a way that is a little frightening. There's a lot of lawlessness in an area where it looks like people are trying to keep the law. There's a lot of lawlessness, and I've heard about this shit. Listen, I didn't have a PlayStation during this time. This may have been only released on the PlayStation 2 or 3 or whatever it was, 4, 5, 6, whatever. Um, but when this game came out, it was so popular that I heard about it enough to go, wow, it almost makes me want to buy that console just for that game. So I'm excited about it. The young girl on the show is Bella Ramsey. I don't know what she's done before this, but she is an incredible actress right off the bat. Uh, I mean, on first sight, I'm like, I've seen her in stuff. What have I seen her in? I mean, oh, she was in Game of Thrones. That may be where I've seen her. How about that? How about that? She played. No way. No way. She played Lyanna Mormont on HBO's fantasy Game of Thrones. Remember the Clan of the Bear? Yeah. She was the bear, Mormont. She was the leader, the young girl who was the leader of her people, and they all respected her. Yeah. She's only 19 right now. So yeah, I think in Game of Thrones she was like 13. She was young. Cool. I knew her somewhere. Good actress. Right on. All right. So yeah. Good stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna watch This Is Us. I'm gonna talk about it. It's exciting. I mean, Pedro Pascal is killing it right now. Mandalorian is getting ready to come out in March, season three. Um, it's awesome. Not only that, but Star Wars right now on Disney Plus has Bad Batch 2. Episode 4 just came out, and I like all of it. I'm here for all of it. All of it is good. All of it is great. All of it is wonderful. So, yeah. Um, I do want to give a shout out to my dad on YouTube. Go check him out. RPEEK. RPEEK. We spent a little bit of time together this past week working on his 32 Studebaker Rodney. For those who don't know, Studebaker was a car company back years ago. And during 33, 32, and 33, they released some cars that were supposed to have an extra luxury package on it to sort of commemorate the famed um, Notre Dame coach, Newt Rodney. Um, we Googled it because I was curious. At the time, the motor on the car only put out 85 horsepower. It currently has a Corvette motor in it that produces about 370 horsepower. It originally did not come with a power steering pump. It was just a manual steering, which was fine when the tires were, thin enough to put your hand around. But now it's a hot rod and it's got tires that are over a foot in width. And so turning it was a bear. And Dad had been doing some research and he figured out that a lot of people, a lot of hot rodders were putting steering columns from Priuses, the electric steering mechanism, and they were retrofitting them to fit their hot rods because the electric assist allowed them to turn it very easily. And so we looked into it. We were like, hey, what would it take to do this? We didn't look into it. He looked into it. I just happened to show up at the right time. So I showed up and he's like, hey, you want to help me figure this out? I said, I sure do. So we installed it. We did a little fabricating, we did a little machining, and we got it installed, and it drives like a dream now. I actually got to drive it and steer with it, and now you can just use your finger to turn the steering wheel. It is that simple. Pretty neat. I think a lot of people are going to go to this. I think a lot of people are already doing this. He said he got the idea from watching other people's videos. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. If you're curious about how to do it, look him up on YouTube, RPEEK. He'll probably help you out if you're kind to him. If you're a jerk, he might forward your message on to Cutworm or Ken up in Washington State, and they'll address your complaints as needed, as long as you roll it up in $100 bill. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Yeah. So pretty cool. I also got to drive the Rat Rod. Always a blast. The last time I drove it, though, it had the old 53 331 Cadillac motor, and he's since taken the motor that was originally in the 64 Rambler, the 283, and he's reworked it, retooled it, rebuilt it, and put it in the Rat Rod. And the Rat Rod weighs nothing. I mean, it's maybe 1,000 pounds, maybe. So putting in the hot rod allows you to drive it like you stole it. It'll haul butt. It's pretty cool stuff. But yeah, had a good time visiting with Dad and Trish. We spent a lot of time on the porch, relaxing and reminiscing and talking about the cosmos and God and religion and space and time and aliens and multiverses and our place in it and your place in it and everybody's place in it. And it was one of those conversations that I really wish was a podcast all in itself, but it's hard to know when to bring equipment out and when to break conversation and when that stuff interrupts your really good conversations. And sometimes it's better just to have the conversation. And I felt like that was one of those moments. I felt like it was the right time to just have the conversation, let it be natural, let it be fluid, let it be what it is, appreciate it for what it is, because it's not going to be there forever. He's not going to be there forever. I'm not going to be there forever. Trish is not going to be there forever. Have that moment in time together. Have that conversation. Spark imagination in each other. Spark all of the things that you want in a conversation, love and fears and hope and all of it. Let it be. Let it be. I'm extremely lucky. I'm an extremely lucky person. I'm extremely blessed. I can't thank you enough for tuning into this podcast. I can't thank my wife enough for supporting me doing this crazy adventure. I can't. I can't even put into words how much I appreciate anybody even listening to me to start with. So thank you. I appreciate it. You being there matters. It's not just a voice in the void. So thank you. Um, oh, I totally missed Confused Breakfast. Dude, how did you let me forget that part? I listened to a bunch of Confused Breakfast. Confused Breakfast! Yeah, I listened. I listened to a lot of podcasts on this trip. I ain't kidding you. This was an epic trip. I listened to them talk about Jurassic Park. Fantastic. I've got my own take on that. I got to see it in a movie theater. One of my best friends, Greg, was working in the theater, and he got us in early to see it. And whenever he loaded up the film, back when you used to have to load up film on a big tray, it was slightly off. So when we started watching it and the first dinosaur appeared, we could see the little side of the wall with the people's arms holding the mechanical things over, and they see the microphone. It was like, wait, what are we watching? He was like, oh crap, I got it off. There was a time where when you had to show movies, you had to show it in a way. You had to do it before you show it to the public because sometimes the frame would be off. So that was kind of the purpose of him saying, "Hey, you guys come in, on this night and after midnight. I got to make sure this thing is set up right so that Friday night on the big premiere, it's ready." So that was sort of the test and tune part of it. And we started watching the Jurassic Park with we could see we could see how they made the sausage, and it was very odd to see Jurassic Park that way. So we had a little different view than most people. I also listened to them do a podcast about Encino Man. That's when we first meet Brendan Fraser. Pauly Shore was his first movie with Sean Astin. Pretty good stuff. Stand By Me, great movie. I watched this as a kid. Weirdly enough, I talked my dad's parents into renting this for me. And if you haven't seen Stand By Me, there's a lot of cursing in it. And my grandparents were very religious, and they didn't stop the movie, but the whole movie you could tell they were pretty uncomfortable with the language. But this was supposed to be about 12-year-old boys finding a dead body, and it's also of a finding of a young boy that had been killed, that had actually gotten hit by a train. It's really good. It's a really good movie. But yeah, so yeah, sorry, confused breakfast guys. I didn't mean to miss you out there in my discussion of podcasts that I listened to. So I did, but I didn't forget it. All right, I did write myself a note like an almost professional, and I went back and I talked about it. So there you go. Hope I made some kind of amends there. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you to everybody who's listening. I appreciate it. And if you stuck around for the end, let me know. I am wearing my local Florence Flamingos baseball hat. sort of a tribute to Bert Kreischer on his show. He's got a giant 8-inch head, and he always wears these minor league baseball team hats. And I thought, I got some crazy hair today. Let me wear a cool hat. So go Flamingos. All right, that's it. Thank you, everybody who listens. I appreciate it. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe. If you haven't yet, take a minute out of your busy day and just click the little 5-star button and say, "Hey, man, I enjoyed the podcast. It was pretty good. I'd like to be a part of it. I like what you said about so and so, and I've checked out that thing you like, and I agree. I'm going to watch this too." Or you can chime in and say, "Hey, I think you're full of crap. I can't believe you got a podcast. Who deemed you the podcast guy that can do that kind of thing out of your bedroom area thing with the Boba Fett picture above your head? What kind of craziness is that?" So yeah, drop me a line. Let me know you're there. I like it. All right. Thanks again. And as always, I end this by saying, cue the cow.
So I want you guys to give me more likes. Give me more likes!